Premier League clubs are holding an emergency meeting today, expected to discuss helping struggling sides on the brink after fans were again banned from attending games.
Well, Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden called on the Premier League to step up and support them. So how much is needed to bail them out? The English Football League says they need £250 million to survive the pandemic. Premier League clubs have reportedly spent almost double that on new players in this month alone. In fact, if you take the reported 5 most expensive transfers so far this summer, including Chelsea signing Kai Havertz for £71 million, it would reach the £250 million needed.
But should it be down to the Premier League to bankroll their lower league counterparts? Joining us now is England and Liverpool football legend John Barnes, who says no, it's not their responsibility. The former chairman of the Professional Footballers Association, Clark Carlisle, says the game is bigger than any individual club and should be preserved. And Portsmouth Chief Executive Mark Catlin says the club would welcome any help at all. Let's talk to you first, Mr Catlin, because what is the economic consequence of the pandemic for you now that the government said no fans to be allowed back in?
We're currently suffering losses of £750,000 a month and have done now since lockdown in March. So we're already approaching a figure of £4-5 million during this period. And for the thing that really is hurting us is the unknown. How long is it going to go on for? So while we keep putting budgets in for a certain set of circumstances, which i.e. was to come back in limited form in September on a trial basis and then to gradually have more fans in during October, and hopefully that would be stepped up. Obviously, that's all gone out the window now, and we're just back to waiting to see what the government says.
How much are you losing on a home match day? What would you normally take?
Well, if you a normal match day, we would take anything in the region of £150,000 to £200,000. But added to that, we've got the season ticket revenue at the start of the season, which, when you amortise it over the season, brings it up to a figure closer to £400,000 to £500,000 per match.
And then of the TV revenue, at the moment, are all the clubs getting the money they were promised, or has it been reduced? How's it working?
No, so that's the one thing, you know, the Premier League have, you know, in some might say, rightly so, been given quite a bit of stick over a lack of response. But we have been advanced pretty much all of this coming season's money by the Premier League and the EFL. And that's the problem, Piers, that at this moment in time, that money has been advanced. It's being used to keep clubs afloat in generally, but there's no more money in the pipeline. So now is the time that, to a degree, I think the Premier League need to do a little bit. But, you know, I think the government have to step in. It's not the Premier League at the moment stopping fans coming back into stadiums. It's our very own government. And I know that you're a big believer in inconsistency. I've watched your programmes throughout the pandemic, and there's been plenty of inconsistencies. But if I look at as another sector, such as the arts and theatres are allowed to reopen. They've got, you know, audiences in at the moment contributing to that economy. They've had their VAT cut to 5%. They've been given a £1.5 billion, you know, package to help them survive, and yet all that our government seems to be doing is piling it on the Premier League. And while I feel that the Premier League should be, to a degree, helping, the government's got to step in as well.
Well, let's bring John Barnes in. You know, it's a difficult one, John, isn't it? Because obviously, on the face of it, if Premier League teams are spending £70 million on players, the natural gut reaction of many people will be, well, come on, surely put some money in the pot. The other side of the coin is it's not the Premier League's fault that there are no fans in the stadiums. That's a government instruction. And so, absolutely, rather like with nightclubs and theatres and so on, to me, if the government ordered them shut, I don't think the club necessarily should be financially punished for that.
Well, I agree with you. Good morning, to begin with.
You agree with me? My God, the apocalypse is truly upon us.
Yes, I do agree with you, but I just wanted to mention the fact that while I did say that it's not the Premier League's responsibility, I think they should. There's a difference between it being their responsibility and what is the right thing to do. Now, it is definitely not the Premier League's responsibility, but I think the Premier League should put money in to help the EFL clubs out, and you've got a meeting today about that. When the Premier League broke away 30 years ago because they realised that the sponsorship money coming into football was really because of the top division. So they felt that they wanted more of the pie, which they got. Now, for 30 years, they've broken away, and of course they have benefited from that. But in these uncertain times, whereby the EFL clubs do need help, I think the Premier League should actually help, and that's what's actually going to be done today.
Well, John, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because Mark Catlin says he would welcome help from the Premier League, but makes a really important comparison with the art sector, which has been given a big bailout. Nobody asked bigger theatres, more successful entertainment businesses to help out the smaller entertainment businesses. Why is it always different with football?
Well, we saw the same thing with Matt Hancock, who, I don't know, it's 155 days now that he's not been on, I'm not sure, coming out and saying that the Premier League players should take a pay cut, as if that was going to help. It seems as if the ills of the world is thrust on football, and because there's so much money in football, they think the solution is really just to blame football.
And he refused to take a pay cut himself when I asked him, by the way.
They're easy targets, aren't they?
Let's bring in Clark Carlisle. I mean, Clark, it's a difficult one, this. I mean, I'm staggered that we're seeing football at all. I didn't think that would happen. As a football fan, right until last night, actually, and John, keep out of this. Right until last night's game, I was very happy to see the Premier League back in action because I'm an Arsenal fan and it's been great distraction, frankly, from everything else. But there's a real risk now, isn't there, that some of these lower league clubs, they're going to go under if we're not very careful. Maybe not right now, but in, April, May, after a whole season of no fans, they're going to go under, some of these clubs.
It's a very real risk, Piers. And my position on this is really quite solid, in as much as these clubs aren't in jeopardy or in trouble through to any fault of their own. This is no mismanagement. This isn't a club over-speculating and failing to accumulate. This is an unprecedented circumstance that has been imposed upon the entirety of football. Now, you draw a really good comparison with the arts. The government have stepped in to support the arts. But the difference between the two industries is that the top theatre companies, the whole ethos and the whole structure of their support isn't dependent on the pyramid of that industry. Football is different, whereby the 92 clubs, the very pyramid system that allows a club like Salford, MK Dons to come from the non-league and all the way through the leagues, and someone like Leicester to win the Premier League, unexpectedly. They're all dependent on that flow of clubs up and down the league and players up and down the league, whereas that's not the same in other industries.
But Clark, also, you could argue that in this situation where, for instance, the government has decided that fans can't go back in, Premier League clubs are also going to have their income streams affected as well. It's really significant to them, isn't it, in terms of matchday revenue? So they're also suffering.
Like John said, it's not their responsibility to support the EFL clubs, but I believe it's their moral duty, because it's the lower league clubs that underpin the entire football system. This is a spectator sport, and the top clubs have only benefited because of this pyramid scheme, because they've elevated themselves to the top of that. Now, the cynical business mind might say, yeah, let the smaller clubs fall by the wayside and the bigger clubs get a larger market share of the demographic out there. But that's not how football operates. It's very tribal. And those who lose their football club won't automatically go and support a Manchester United or a Manchester City.
That would be a devastating situation.
John Barnes, let's just try and lift the mood slightly. Liverpool last night, I got to say, I thought Arsenal were back. We were back in form. We were top of the league. It was all looking rosy. We got completely crushed last night by one of the best teams I have seen in many, many years. How highly do you rate this Liverpool side?
If they keep going this way, they'll be one of the greatest Liverpool sides ever. The balance is the most important thing. If you look at Arsenal, for example, they're great going forward, but they haven't got the right balance between defence, midfield and attack. Liverpool in all departments, from a defensive point of view, midfield point of view, in terms of supporting the strikers and getting back to help the defence and the front three. So I think that the balance of Liverpool was always there. I mean, people thought at Arsenal, because they beat them twice last year towards the end of the season. But I always fancied Liverpool against Arsenal because they were just...
Well, we beat Liverpool after they'd already won the league, and that's always a different mentality. Do you think you get in this Klopp side, John? And if so, who would you drop?
Well, I'll probably be on the bench, but I'm 57 years old now, so maybe I'll be on the bench. But, in my heyday. Listen,
I got to say, there was a moment last night with Jurgen Klopp when Jurgen Klopp heard Roy Keane use the word sloppy about Liverpool last night, and Klopp absolutely exploded. Kloppy got stroppy in front of the copy. But it was he really didn't like that, and it showed me the real determination of that guy.
I felt sorry for Roy. I don't often feel sorry for Roy because he was really praising Liverpool throughout the night, saying how great they were. So he said they were a brilliant side, they played excellently, and he just said a bit sloppy at times. And unfortunately, that's all Klopp heard. But if he heard the whole commentary, I think that he would have given Roy a pat on the back.
Before we let you go, Mark Catlin, I just wanted to talk to you about the prospect for fans of actually watching football again. We can go to the pub, as you said, we can go to the theatre. There were a number of pilots, weren't there, where stadiums did allow fans back in. As far as I could tell, there were no infections traced to those pilots. So do you think you've been treated unfairly compared to other businesses?
Yes, I definitely do, Susanna. It's that's one of the most disappointing things, that we're only really looking for help. Most clubs are looking for help because we're not able to generate our own revenue.
Yes.
We believe that given the skill set of the people we've got, if you take Portsmouth as an example, with 20,000 fans that come every week, every home game, managing that, and we would turn down a pilot last week against Wigan for just 1,000, and yet non-league clubs at certain levels can have fans in. Women's games under the top 2 tiers can have fans in. So, it's, as I say, it's just that inconsistency. And just something before, obviously, you're going to go on to another subject. It's not just about football at any level, and I'm including the Premier League in this. We did so much during the pandemic via our community trust in the local community. We were there serving every day 300 hot foods for support staff. Our players were volunteering. There was 4,500 food parcels delivered out throughout Portsmouth for people that couldn't get out. We do so much every day in our local communities, and you're playing with fire if you start letting clubs go to the wall. We really are.
I think a club like yours, it is part of the fabric of the community.
Yeah.
And it's something everyone looks forward to. I hate the fact I can't go and watch Arsenal. And it's every one of these teams has a huge fan base, huge community.
Yeah, Clark?
Clark, final word to you.
Added to that is the secondary and tertiary businesses that depend on a football club to survive. You're not just talking about, let's say, Portsmouth in this instance. You're talking about the food suppliers. You're talking about all the match day and during the week, all the revenue that's created for the local community. Local commerce in Burnley went up over 30% on promotion to the Premier League. That's the impact a football club has. So we're not just talking about football. We're talking about jobs and businesses in the wider community.